Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatiron's Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatiron's Tuning. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Flatiron Syndicate Podcast. We're here in the shop. We've got Dylan with us. We've got a new face, who's also named Dylan, another new member of the team that's back in the shop. And the topic for today is a subject that we've kind of bounced around the shop for the last couple of weeks and decided we should just try and make this into a podcast, which is if you won the lottery for $35,000 and you're going to buy a car, what would you spend $35,000 on right now? Would you buy something new? Would you buy something used? Like, what would those options be? And I think it's an interesting question because $35,000, that's not a cheap car. That's not a small budget per se. But with the cost of current new vehicles, I mean, this is like, $25,000 to $30,000 is kind of like the very minimum budget you'd have to get into something new. So 35 it's just a little bit more than that minimum, and then it gets to be a real interesting question of, is there anything new that really grabs your attention at that price point, or are the used offerings just so much more interesting, so much more enticing? So we've been stewing on it over here, and I wonder if some of you at home have been kind of looking at some things in the same budget. So without further ado, what do you guys think? What maybe?
So to start off, I was like really interested in looking at the cheapest possible cars I could find that had options that I could add that I might get to something that I actually like, right?
Okay.
Like, I started off looking at weird stuff like Nissan Versas and like just stuff that I was like, oh, like, do they have a turbo motor option? Do they have any kind of premium option? And I was honestly kind of disappointed in that, like, a lot of the cheapest model cars in the market, there just aren't even really great add-ins for, say, like, maybe a brake upgrade or like, oh, the turbo motor that's on the slightly higher trim version of the car. You can't get that until you like really jump into like an
It's
actual
a big
higher
step
trim
from
car.
like the bargain basement to like the mid tier is a big jump. Yeah.
Like, oh, I get the V6 Ultima motor and like the
Right.
really like small tier car. I get
Right.
the like super light compact, but 300 horsepower or something. And there's really not much when it comes to that. But
Yeah.
we kind of talked about this and wanted to come at it from the perspective of like, this is a car that you might daily more than necessarily like, oh, I want a race car for this budget.
Yeah, this is not a toy car. This is something like if you really legitimately were having to buy a car that you were going to drive, like daily drive this thing.
Yeah.
Like, what would it be? Not just a track toy. Like, this is something that you're really going to be driving. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of started out like, oh, what are the cheapest options? Like bare bones, what comes up,
Yeah.
And once I sort of worked my way up the market to something that seemed reasonable, that was coming in under our budget of $35,000, it got into like some sort of weird options. Like I was looking at a Miata, looking at GR86 or BRZ, because I've kind of been thinking about getting something rear-wheel drive as more of a daily for my next car, because I do have like a pretty easy commute. I live in Colorado, but with good snow tires, my commute isn't too bad, so I could do it. So I was looking at more rear-wheel drive focused options.
Okay.
But what I found was like BRZ, Miata, GR86, and I actually came up on the cheapest option of like a 2023 Camaro, which surprised me. I was like, okay, what's the deal? Like, I see a $27,000 price point as like the base option, so I started digging in, and like the 2-liter turbo 6-speed manual Camaro, just like no options, not spec'd out at all, comes in like I think just below 27, but then there's like delivery and dealer fees.
Right.
So the estimation on the price was like $27,050 or something like that.
I mean, that would be an interesting car.
And it's like a 276 horsepower 2-liter turbo, so it's not like it's not nothing.
It's not nothing. Yes.
It's a heavier chassis. I think the curb weight was like 32 to 3,300 pounds, kind of depending on what your options were. So you could possibly take some weight out if you really wanted to be like track, build with it.
Yeah.
You could take the rear seats out and do something like that, skim a little weight and maybe have some fun.
Yeah.
But coming in at like 27-ish and maybe some taxes, that kind of leaves a little bit of space to maybe
Yeah,
get a
you
nicer
could play
set
with
of tires, nicer set of wheels.
Yeah.
I didn't price out like an actual brake upgrade for it. They don't have a package for that, but I'm sure there's probably some kind of brake upgrade you could look at that
If
might
you've
be
got
in
like
that range.
7,000 to play with, you should be able to figure out something for brakes if you
Yeah,
need to.
so
But
that was my thought.
I think the wheels and tires on those base Camaros, they leave a little bit to be desired.
Yeah, it's like an 18 by 8.5 or 18 by 9, and then I think it's like stepped, it's a little wider in the rear.
Maybe that's better than I was thinking. I was thinking they were like really, like not Steelies, but like just like one step beyond Steelies.
They're 18s now from what I saw.
Okay.
So they're decent. I was surprised by like 27,000. This is like, it's $2,000 less than the BRZ of like base trim level. And the BRZ had, 50-ish less horsepower. It's a little lighter too, but that was kind of my debate. I was like, man, if it comes in that much cheaper, if I have a little budget to play with, that extra like $2,000 from the BRZ, I could work with some mods. And I have never had a Camaro before, but it was like maybe that's an option if I was just entertaining maybe a new rear wheel drive cheap car to drive. And you could sometimes take it to the track.
Well, and just the fact that it has a turbo engine, there's a good likelihood that there's going to be some room to play there. Whereas, like that's one of the hardest questions for me with the BRZ is that are you going to be happy with basically just leaving the engine alone? Because with it being naturally aspirated, like to make a jump up in power, it's a much bigger investment because you're looking at like a supercharger kit or something along those lines.
Yeah. One thing I didn't really look into too much about the Camaro is, aftermarket upgrades.
Yeah.
I know some of the domestic manufacturers like Ford and those guys, they actually tend to have some interesting kind of carb approved, like off the shelf options from like Edelbrock or whoever, these very known quantity brands in the US that like you might just be able to go and get a Carb EO turbo kit for that Camaro now.
And tuner options. Yeah. Because for a while there, the turbo Mustangs, which I think was also a 2-liter or maybe it was a 2.3 liter.
Yeah, I think they were 2-liter.
Yeah, but there was an access port for them. There's people that were having fun with those Mustangs and playing around. So that's if it's that makes it an interesting comparison to the BRZ.
And having that extra dollars to play with too. Like you said, getting up to 35,000. You still have some leeway. So being able to throw winter tires and new wheels all the way around, and you probably would still have some extra on top of that you could look into. Maybe even just a downpipe or something. Like you said, Ford has Ford Performance that has a lot of certified parts that are very good to run. So I would assume GM probably has something similar.
It's interesting, when we, for most of us, when you have a budget, having a little bit of cushion so that you can throw a set of wheels and tires on, or like I know that I'm going to want this, that, or the other, so you can afford that in the budget. That's having something that comes in below gives you that wiggle room. But 27 to 35, there's definitely room to play there. But it's like, there's not a whole lot below that.
For something that has a bit of power, a bit of performance that you could maybe have some fun with. And that was also kind of where I came at it from, was I wanted maybe a rear-wheel drive platform because I've been thinking about that.
Sure.
One thing that like Dylan totally surprised me with some of the stuff he found was like the front-wheel drive and sort of all-wheel drive offerings are kind of there. Like one I saw that I didn't really get super hyped up about was like the Hyundai N line. I think it was the Elantra N.
Elantra N,
was 33 or 34, and then you found like a Mercedes, right?
All right. Yeah. What did you find?
So, there's kind of a lot of options there. But as far as new cars, it is really hard to find something that, even is at that $35,000. And there's some package options and that kind of thing. Like Dylan was saying that, like you can build a BRZ up to about 34-ish if you wanted to, adding all the stuff. But there's actually the Mercedes A-Class. The base model of that is front-wheel drive and comes in at 33.
Yeah.
So it's pretty close. And the 4MATIC is like 35,400 or something. So, certainly a little bit more. And I'm sure, like Dylan said, with dealer fees and everything.
Sure.
But
we'll let that slide.
Yeah,
we'll see that fits.
It's pretty close. So I thought, even for just an entry-level Mercedes, that's kind of crazy for a daily driver.
Yeah.
Would
it be any fun? Would it be any fun though?
And it is a turbo inline 4, so I think with the all-wheel drive it'd be a little bit better, but it is a little low on power, even compared to like a BRZ. I think it was 188.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it's pretty low, but it did have the 7-speed dual clutch.
Right.
So it had like a weird torque figure too. It showed 220 pound-feet of torque from 1,400 to 4,000 RPM was the figure that it gave on the chart.
Yeah.
I didn't see a dyno graph, but it probably is a really interesting drive.
If it's got some torque that low, so it's probably like a really small turbo. So maybe it's going to drive and feel like it has more power than the number would let on because it's doing it all before the 5250 changeover.
Yeah, and the gearing, I'm sure, in the 7-speed helps. But yeah.
Right. Well, but would that be your choice then?
See, that's really hard because personally I'm not a huge Mercedes person.
Right.
There's kind of the maintenance and that kind of thing to think about with it is probably just a little bit more than, obviously like a Toyota or even a BRZ or, something like that. So I think that's kind of where I myself would kind of struggle with that because I know personally I'd probably go used. But as far as new cars go, I think that'd be definitely in my consideration.
It's interesting, I think you go into this and how much of a cushion do you want to be able to go through and do things? Or do you just spend your whole budget? Do you buy as much car as you can afford? That's kind of like the first choice that you're faced with. And I mean, us being people that tinker with things, wanting to get in there and having the room to play is appealing, but then even used car values are still reasonably high, I would say. But they're not. There's some that I found that were lower than I expected, ish.
The thing I found was it's really inconsistent. Right now, when I took to Facebook Marketplace and looking for used cars, there was a lot less stuff available than when, say, I was looking at my STI hatchback and looking at cars in the market. So it seems like it's fewer and more far between, but you'll find some nice options potentially that someone's been holding out. The prices have been a little weird and kind of coming back down a bit. So some people are picking up used cars here and there. Some people are holding out and saying, "Oh, my car is worth a lot more," and you can find a nice specimen. But
it'd be interesting, you guys in the comments, let us know what you think. But I wonder if we're at this tipping point where there was a period where used car values were just crazy high because new cars, there was production issues, there was the whole chip shortage that was preventing new cars from being made. The prices all went up. And so then kind of because all the new car prices went up, it seems like used car prices jumped up as well. But now it seems like things are correcting a little bit. So there's maybe some of the listings that are older or people that are just holding out for somebody that maybe they've got some rare configuration or something like that. And they're just going to hold out for that extra $5,000. But there's more people that are just getting in for just want to move away from the car, pricing it lower. And so there's value there. One of the things an STI hatch is one of the things that I looked at, and I figured that there would be options under $35K, and fortunately there were. So last year of the STI hatch was 2014. I was trying to kind of look between 2010, 2011, and 2014, and there are a handful of them out there with definitely over 100,000 miles, well below 30. Some of those were in the 20s. And I think one of them I found was 20. There's one that I found was 75,000 miles for, I think it was 25. And then there's one that had really low miles. It was something like 20,000 miles. but they wanted, I think they wanted $39 for it.
Wow.
Which, yeah, that seems a little bit of a stretch. Maybe that's one of those listings that's been out there for a handful of months and things are kind of correcting. But then I was just like, what I really want to get, basically a 10-year-old STI for, let's call it 25, and then have 10 to play with. I mean, I don't know, there's part of me that, like, that's really appealing, kind of hits that sweet spot. But then my thought was, well, what else is out there? And, and then new. Like, I mean, so it's, Dylan, you sound like you were looking at new mostly.
As far as new goes, I ended up settling on the Camaro just because of price, and like I'm sure there's probably some available pretty quick because it's Chevy. Like, you're not going to have trouble finding a base model Camaro if you just like call a few dealerships for the most part. As far as used goes, I found a couple of things that I ended up looking at. Like around here on Facebook, I found some guy. He had I think it was a 2022. Audi A4 turbo, and it was like $34,999 was what he had it listed for. And I was like, I mean, I think it was 15,000 miles on the car, 2022 A4 turbo, which I think it's in the 40s. I forget what the list price was.
Okay.
So that was one thought. Was like my comfort used option was that seemed like a great like middle ground. It's got some power. It's going to be real comfortable.
Well,
I could modify it.
It's used, but like just barely.
Yeah, just barely used. Yeah. It's a great chassis. So that was one I found. And then I started going down the rabbit hole of importers. And
oh, no. Yeah.
I was getting excited. I was like, with $35,000, you could get some pretty cool import
explain what you mean by looking at importers.
So, like, Rev Hard Motors is a company here in Colorado, or like Top Rank Vehicle Importers. And these are basically companies that go out to Japan or really anywhere in the world to find import vehicles. They'll purchase them there, sometimes even hold them in storage for years there until they're ready to import to the U.S.
So in these cars, I think right now it's 25 years. So once a car is 25 years old, then you can legally import it, register it, and drive it on the street here.
Yeah.
And, what is 25 years? Let's just call it basically 2024. So in 2024, 25 years old would be...
Yeah, 1999.
99.
Yeah, it's crazy. These companies, basically like Top Rank, Rev Hard, they've got tons of options available of like really cool old import cars that are usually pretty well maintained, sub 150,000 kilometers typically, sometimes a little higher if it's like a really nice car. So I started looking down that rabbit hole because I was like, well, if I'm thinking about used, like, I would love to daily like a GTST or something. It'd be cool. So I think I found a couple of options. There was like a Chaser that was a weird one. It was
that's cool.
200,000 kilometer Chaser, had like a front mount intercooler, a bunch of mods, but it was really clean, had like a body kit, and it was I think like 34 something or 35. Wow.
Okay.
I was blown away by the price. I was like, man, I would be like in love with that car, but maintaining it and dailying it would be like absurd. I feel like it. Like,
would you want to daily a 25-year-old Japanese market only vehicle? This is, I suspect that there's probably people that are doing it now.
Oh, definitely.
I think there's probably, especially like being able to go back to 99, buy some of these Halo cars, Dream cars, whatever, and bring them over. Boy, that's going to be tempting.
It's like one of those like dream experiences where I feel like I have this very like perfect image of in my head of it, but then you're gonna end up getting in that car and like rattling it to pieces as you're daily driving over your railroad tracks and whatever on your drive to work.
So have either of you guys ever owned and driven a car with either a JDM engine or a JDM import?
No, I have not.
Okay, so way back, I did have an SR20 swapped S13 that I dailied for about 2 years, and it was a lot of fun. But one of the main motivations I had in selling it was like just finding parts was just
a nightmare.
Just enough of a problem that I just did not want it was not worth it to me to deal with like anything. I never had any catastrophic failure in the car, but it was just like I knew that I could not get parts easily.
Yeah, and anytime there's an issue, it's like you're waiting weeks potentially if you even find what you need to fix the issue. I could only imagine.
And that's a popular platform and a popular engine. I mean, you know, you get into something that
this was a little more rare. Gosh, this is a very long time ago. This was in the early 2000s because this was, let's see, this is probably from 2003 to 2005 is when I had this car. Because so it was there were JDM importers. There were some shops on the internet that were stocking some of the parts for the car. The rumor was, there's a lot of crossover because the Sentra SCR has an SR20 engine in it too. There's a lot of parts. No, so the guys at the local Nissan dealership did not like me because I kept ordering things thinking, this will be the same, and go like, this is not the same. Taking it back. Sorry. So the parts were there, and like eBay was a good resource at the time, but just.
Yeah. Now one cool thing is like RevHard, for example, they are starting to offer like a service program after you buy a car too, nice. Where you can maintain it with them and they'll source parts for you typically. So it's coming around, I think, a little bit. There's more support, but I was looking at that Chaser and it's like it's 35 for the Chaser, and I'm like, damn, I was thinking about a Camaro with budget on top, so I don't know how much it seems like
which is brand, well, it is brand new, and it's like.
Or 200,000 kilometer Chaser with a sick front mount and a body kit.
Well,
probably a bigger maintenance bill.
And we're seeing more and more people that are starting to import those early Impreza WRXs and STIs because think about a 99 STI. But would you want a 99 STI? Maybe Type RA, something like that. Like that would be kind of fantastic.
Yeah, Wyatt over at the dealership, he just got one actually. I'm pretty sure.
Nice. So they're becoming available, but with parts. So thankfully, we work with Roger Clark Motorsports, who has a lot of experience working on those older
2-liter platforms.
2-liter platforms, the 20G, the 20K. They have a lot of part support for them. They're coming out with a lot of Subaru's discontinued a lot of things for these cars, and they're coming out with like some of the more critical replacement parts. They have a coil on plug adaptation, so you can go from just like the single coil to driving spark plug wires. You can convert them to coil on plug for some of those earlier STIs, which is I think a pretty trick mod for them. Timing kits and that sort of thing, but there are a lot of things that are discontinued. Air conditioning. Yeah, if your AC doesn't work, that's unless you can find a used compressor, you're probably kind of stuck.
Yeah, it's going to be some kind of aftermarket setup, figuring something out.
There's a handful of people, I think there's 2 or 3 people that have got, in the area that have got them in, brought them to shops, AC doesn't work, they need a new compressor. They somehow find us. We run it through the chain and try and find out what's available. Oh yeah, it's all discontinued. Like, okay, no. And I think power steering pumps too are. A lot of them I think are getting discontinued, which I guess is not terribly surprising. Getting 25 to 30-year-old cars. I mean, but it's that is one of those key things of like if you're gonna buy like a 98 STI and you want to daily it, there's gonna be a lot of stuff that you can do, like regular maintenance stuff. We can certainly help with that. But then there's going to be certain hard parts that if they break, it's gonna be something that's a challenge. I mean, that was one of the realizations that I had. It's like that's the difference between driving a brand new Camaro and a 25-year-old Toyota Chaser. It's like, okay, well, you have a problem with your Camaro, you can take it into a shop, a dealership, whatever. Mm-hmm. The parts are probably. They're probably going to, and the parts are probably going to be on the shelf. It's something where the car's hopefully going to be down for a day or two, worst case. Whereas if you're going to have to source some kind of part from Japan.
Yeah, you got to bring your car to RevHard, leave it with them for a couple of weeks while they figure out what they need, get it from somebody. Yeah.
I mean, it's, or like if you got to try and find something used on eBay, maybe you have to order in 2 or 3 of the parts until you find one that's actually in good enough shape that it actually does function. I mean, it's like the downtime can really stretch. So it's like if it's going to be your only car, like that's a critical consideration.
And unfortunately, there's not a lot of those cars that, you know, it's like, yeah, you can get a Supra and they have all kinds of support everywhere, you know, for something like that. But, you know, especially when you get into, you know, like a 99 Type RA or, you know, something that's a little more unique like that. It's not like, you know, even the major aftermarket companies may not have, you know, the things to kind of support it, which is very fair when it was a JDM only or Euro only car.
And actually, come to think of it, so the Type RAs, 98 and maybe I can't remember how far back we went. Those were the STIs that had the 5-speed transmission, but they had the DCCD, the thumb wheel DCCD, and I think it went back for a couple of years. But like, so those cases, the 98 and older 5-speed cases are different than the 99 and newer 5-speed cases, and so there's different gear sets, like the first generations versus the second generation. The first generation 5-speed cases, the vast majority of the parts for those cases, I believe, are discontinued. Like those, the DCCD, the thumb wheel DCCD for the 5-speed case, all that stuff is long gone. So it's one of those, like, you get the car and it has this cool function, awesome, but if anything goes wrong, like now
maintaining it has become a nightmare.
It would be. I just don't think I could daily drive the thing. I think knowing how much miles you'd put on in a year, boy, there's so many things that could go wrong. Where like now the car is gonna sit until you find a solution for much longer.
Yeah, being the person that I am, I don't think I would end up keeping a car like that, like OEM plus, as they say. Like I would end up just modifying it to the point where parts are accessible here, like. And that's a long road for a vehicle like that. Like, taking it to
would you want to do it?
Exactly.
I mean, like, let's say you get an SCI, a real deal SCI Type RA, that everything is in good shape and everything works. Like, that is, there's a lot of us that would want something like that. It's becoming something of a collector's piece, right? But if you modernize it, like, geez, at this point, can we even call it a Restomod? The modification is almost to improve the reliability and give you more parts. I mean, you could put in a modern engine, a modern transmission and drivetrain so that now, like for all those critical running components, you have good part selection.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to what we talked about in one of the other podcasts. Like, Subaru, it would be so cool if Subaru offered like a crate motor program with like a modern motor drivetrain.
Especially like with ECU. Generation correct stuff. Mm-hmm. Because then you could buy the STI Type RA. You could basically put in new engine and drivetrain.
Yeah, like
but it would still be
updated,
correct.
Version 4, version 6 crate motor or something. Yeah. And that would be crazy.
And so then there would be a demand for the original, like something that's like really, really original, but there would be a demand for those Restomod cars for sure. And if everything is generation correct, I think they could both grow in value equivalently. But like if you put in a modern US spec engine and transmission, one of these older cars, at that point, really, it's just right-hand drive versus left-hand drive. Like I think the uniqueness would come down a little bit, though, as we've also talked about, it's hard to find GC chassis that are clean and straight and all these sorts of things. I mean, there maybe would be a little bit more to it, but I don't know. It's hard to know, like, what kind of, like, I guess, would you be shooting yourself in your foot if you did that for like 5 years down the road, where if you would have just left it alone, now the car is maybe gone up 50% in value, or now it's actually you've eroded a good chunk of the value because you took out all the original stuff.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's tough with that type of thing. I think if I was buying it as a driver car, with a collector vehicle like that, that would be my mentality of like, I'm buying this for myself because I want to drive this chassis.
Right.
And I'm going to modify it so that I can maintain it, but I'm not keeping this as like a collector car. Yeah, and if I was buying, one of these import cars as a collector car, it would just be a whole different mentality of like, this thing lives in a garage, I spray it with a humidifier every day.
You have to make that choice going in. You have to know what you want out of this car, because if it's really a daily driver, like, you cannot think of it as a collector's piece, because, man, you're going to get yourself in some difficult situations.
Yeah.
I would imagine down the road, because something breaks. Do I do it with a quick fix because I need to get my car working again, or do I wait, to find power steering pump or something like that is more correct.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an unspoken decision that a lot of people looking at those chassis really have to make for themselves. It's kind of
I really think that the majority of people that are buying those cars now, it's because it's their dream car. It's a halo car. It's super cool. It's something that they've always wanted, and it's not a daily driver.
I know a few people in my friend circles who have bought them and are dailying them, and more power to you. Like, that's fucking awesome. Like, Stagias and stuff like that, just driving them on the daily. It's just, like, the thought of, like, trying to source parts, like you're saying, scares me to the point where if I was to do that, you know, I would, if I bought an old Type RA, I would just try and gut it, get as much modern USDM stuff that we have access to in there, and then try to figure out a way to emissions compliance.
I think both would be fun options. Yeah. It's just you kind of have to decide which path you want to go down, and probably best to make that decision pre-purchase versus like get the car in hand and go like, what do I do now?
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other thing to think, and kind of, you know, bit of my background too, is the body parts.
Yeah.
You know, if you're dailying something, you need to be okay with the rock chips on your front bumper. You need to be okay that if you get a little crack in it, they don't make them anymore. It's not something that you can go repair a plastic bumper all the time. So
and a lot of the pieces of the bumper, because a lot of those earlier SCIs, they had different fog lights, fog light covers, turn signals. Like there's a lot of little pieces also on the bumper that are going to be hard. I think you could source them, but it's going to be a little bit more challenging.
And especially, you know, you get into those really rare models, you know, even that Chaser, you know, you have a body kit or something on it. Hopefully they still make the body kit. Yeah. Hopefully that company's
Probably
around.
Not.
You know,
Probably not.
So you really get into, like, you need to be okay with using the car every single day and what's going to happen to it.
For sure.
You know, replacing a windshield isn't something that you always worry about until it's $1,000 to get one from, you know, overseas somewhere.
I bet you, a windshield. Oh, jeez, yeah. So, I bet importing a Japanese windshield would be
not cheap.
I bet you'd be $2,000, $1,500, $2,000.
I haven't priced it out. We'll have to see. Let us know in the comments below if you've had to replace a windshield or like a weird large panel on
Jeremy
one
was
of these
asking
cars.
about the SVX windshield because I think they might still have some in Japan, but there's none. It's been discontinued in the US, and it was like. It was a lot.
That's crazy. So Roger Clark saw one in stock, and they were testing it out for us.
No, I can't remember all the details. I think Jeremy had actually found one or knew of a way to get it from Japan, but it still had to come through, and it was just like, and something like a piece of glass. Shipped overseas. Like
they probably make you sign a waiver that says no go. If it breaks, it breaks. Sorry, buddy.
I hope that forklift driver's real careful.
All of them. All of the forklift drivers. Every single one of them from point A to point B. Yeah. All right. So let's go back to new, because the new WRX and the new BRZ were on my list, and they're real close to the top. Now the BRZ for 2024, the interesting wrinkle that they've done with that car, and it's relevant to our last podcast, eyesight is now standard. Yeah. But what that did is that bumped the price across the models for the BRZ about $1,500, $2,000. But the TS, the BRZ TS, is $36,000. So it's just over budget, but it's close. Mm-hmm. That was high on my list because that's kind of the perfect BRZ. Like, it's got the suspension, it's got the brakes. It's I mean, I think it looks really good. It's very cool. It's just over budget. But I mean, would that be the one? Let's just say it was $35,000. Let's say you're a really good negotiator, and you could get somebody to take pity on you or whatever, and sell you a TS BRZ TS for $35,000. Would that check all the boxes, like compared to your Camaro, or is it just a little bit too expensive at that $35,000, $36,000 price point?
I think it depends what you want. If you want a lighter car that has not necessarily a ton of horsepower, but is just a good driver, that's a really great option, for sure. I also noticed with the Camaro, going into 2024, there was a jump in price, just like the BRZ, but that's because they actually stopped offering the 2-liter turbo combination that I was looking at. That was only a 2023 package. Oh boy. 24s, they're all V6 and up. Like, it's V6, V8, and greater displacement. So it's all like changing, I guess, in that respect. Like it seems like a lot of these base models are going up in price just in general across the board.
Which is kind of crazy as it is, but
But like comparing say even the V6 Camaro with like around 300 horsepower, I think that gets a bump from the 4-cylinder turbo. It's like still kind of a hard sell for me with the BRZ because I'm sure there's like some Camaro packages that have little bits and bobs upgraded too. Or we were talking about like a Mustang at one point, like the 5.0 base model is pretty cheap, but with like a brake package, I think that's also around 35 too.
Yeah, it's really close. Yeah. And again, you have all the aftermarket support with those too, so that's kind of the other thing is if, us wanting to tinker, that's kind of, I think all of us are kind of in that boat. Getting a BRZ that is at that limit already and, I do want to throw on new wheels or, winter tires or there's, I want to get a lip or something, that one little thing that you want to add is, you have more to do with the Camaro or that kind of thing. But
well, the advantage of the BRZ TS to me is it has everything is there except for maybe it really is just tires or maybe just wheels and tires. But the Brembo brakes on that are perfectly sufficient. I mean, set of brake pads and you can track the snot out of that car. You're going to be in good shape.
It's way lighter than the Camaro or the Mustang or any of these other,
And I love the interior of the BRZ, the way that the BRZ felt to drive, and you don't have the giant screen. I think it still doesn't have the giant screen. I really hope it doesn't.
It's not too big from what I remember. The 2023 that we looked at,
yeah,
it was fairly small infotainment. With
it was
switches and stuff.
It was more normal. It felt like it feels like a driver's car. It's not like it doesn't have the fancy gizmos. So, there was a real draw to me for that car, but I don't think. Could you get a base BRZ? Yes, and still have enough money to put some brakes on it? Yes, but I think for me, it would be worth the stretch to get the TS because it's the TS, but then it was over budget, and so it's like nuts. So I can't. And the other deal breaker for me, like rear wheel drive, I think I could live with it. I have a rear wheel drive car. I've had rear wheel drive cars, but it is definitely a limiting factor here in the snow. Yeah. But the two doors is the tricky part for me. Like I like the BRZ because it's got the hatch, so like. Getting things like
Chaser, man.
Yeah. Well,
four-door Chaser.
Well, I came up with another option, but like to me, the size of the BRZ, that's the other kicker. The Camaro might be a little bit bigger, but it doesn't have a hatch, does it?
It's just a rear Camaro trunk. Is a 2-door as well. Obviously, it's just a coupe. It does have just a small trunk, so it would be pretty limited on space. It'd be probably comparable to the BRZ, maybe a little more.
So that's like daily driving, something like that. Like you could probably put a rack on it, take a bike to a trailhead or something like that if you really needed to. But like there's like what you're doing with the car for the most part, like you're not going to be hauling stuff.
Yeah, that's where the WRX, like the 22 plus WRXs really are appealing as a daily. Like for me, driving it down to Colorado Springs for that event and all that is super comfortable, rode great, had quiet ride.
100%. And then so you get the WRX base, which is like I want to say 32. Now, and I don't know if they've added eyesight as a standard on that yet. I can't remember. I couldn't find anything. At least I can't remember it. But I think you'd have enough room. I know the flex fuel's coming. Base WRX with flex fuel, like that would be an absolute kick in the pants.
You'd be at like 300 horsepower most likely or more, depending on how much you're pushing it.
And you have the usability.
And you have all-wheel drive. Yeah. It's a stand there. It is definitely nice. It's comfortable to drive. It's spacious. It's a nice interior. To fit in the budget, it would have to be pretty much the base model. You can't get something fancy like the TR right out. But like that's the thing is like, okay, you put the flex fuel on, you're at kind of the peak of your budget. You haven't done brakes. You haven't done wheels and tires. Like I think for just strictly daily driving, you'd be okay. But if you really wanted to start playing with the car, that's where it's a bit of a conundrum because for driving on the street, it would be an absolute blast. It'd be a great car. But if you wanted to play with it, all of a sudden you'd be having to save up and put...
Get a lot of things to add.
Yeah.
And that's where I really run into the issue of the used cars, too. Because the used car prices are right now at a point where you can find that unique stuff and still have a little bit of budget. Like I know, kind of a weird one, but I like Mini Coopers quite a bit. Especially the first generation when they brought them back under BMW. So I was looking and I saw, I think it was, I can't remember if it was an 05 or an 06 Mini Cooper that was the John Cooper Works GP version. So the GP is, their kind of actual race version of it. So, it still has all the cool John Cooper Works stuff, but it has all the carbon fiber. They tear out the rear seats and it has a strut bar instead. It's pretty cool. And they're a supercharged inline four.
The first one.
That's 1.8 liter. And I believe it's with so there's usually like 3 stages for those superchargers. The 13, 15, and 19% reduction pulleys are kind of one of the major ones. And usually with those, people are looking mid 200s for horsepower and still usable. It's not like you're...
Well, all right, so the question is, all right, what was this going for?
22. And that's was the hard thing.
That's a lot. And if it's got all of that deleted stuff, would you really daily drive it?
Well, and that's the thing is, personally, I have a bit of a drive in the morning. So, I have about an hour that I get to use my car, is the way I like to think of it. So, I get to drive some back roads and stuff that, it's not like I'm all interstate driving just in a straight line or something. So, something like that is a little bit more playful, I think is kind of worth it. Like a BRZ or something is going to be a little bit more entertaining for that. But it is something that, you still have the upgrade or the ability to do the upgrades and the money for it. So
that's true.
If you really wanted to go crazy, you kind of could, but it already is at a point where, if you just wanted to do brakes and, throw a new entertainment system or something like that and just a bunch of all the maintenance stuff, like you could be still under 35 and have quite a car.
I had a friend that had one of those, actually Sweet House, that was with us before. He had one of those, just the regular Mini, not anything fancy like the Cooper Works. That thing, it really was a go-kart. I would say for winters, it was maybe a touch on the low side. So
I could see that.
But the handling of that car it was crazy.
And you're still getting a 6-speed, which again, for us is probably important. Maybe not for everybody. But...
There were some weird maintenance issues on that car, but for the most part, it was something that you can have fun. Like if you've got a long-ish commute every day that is on some fun roads, you would probably have a blast in a Mini Cooper. And you got a rear hatch. Even in the standard cars that had the rear seat. Honestly, I didn't even think of this, but why?
It's so small.
You already have the 2 doors anyway. I don't know many people that could fit back there.
You can get into the back seat. You're just going to have to remove your legs.
Yes,
and most of us can't do that. So why did you even do that?
You just curl up and grab the strut bar in the back.
You probably would have more room. Yes.
And actually, the strut bar, you got something to hold on to. It's actually a win-win. So that does make some sense.
And if you want to throw some groceries in there, you actually could.
That is true.
That's something
that is true.
It does have a little bit more room than even a standard. Mini Cooper S even.
Hatches are cool for sure. That's a good one. Yeah. It's so for me when we were talking about this, I just threw out. I've always wanted a dual clutch car, a PDK car. Okay, well, are there options in this price point? And you guys were like, Macan, Porsche Macan.
Yeah.
And so I was like, under 35. I was hesitant. I doubted it, but I looked and there are actually options. Turbo Macan. With the flappy panels, the dual clutch, 70. I think I found one with 75,000 miles on it for 30, and then there were some with even higher miles that were touching into the 20s. It's for me that checks pretty much every single box. It's all-wheel drive. It is turbo. They're a little bit on the heavy side, but they got power, and you've got the 8-speed dual clutch. That would be cool.
Yeah.
it's got the rear hatch.
Yeah, we were talking earlier. It's like the evolution of the STI hatchback. It's like
True.
the big brother or whatever you want to call it.
Well, for me, it's like the grown up version of the WRX like wagon.
Yeah.
Because like very similar silhouettes. Like it's actually the one drawback would be it's very similar in size to the WRX wagon. Like there's a back seat, there's 4 doors, but like back seat for kids, no problem at all. Back seat for full grown adults over 6 feet tall. How long?
It's a squeeze.
Yeah.
You could do it. You could do it. Like if, hey, we're going up, 5 minutes up the street, no problem. Hey, we're going to drive for the next 16 hours. Like you head out. I'm going to get a plane ticket. I'll just meet you there.
Yeah.
I don't think I would want to sit in the back seat for hours and hours on end.
Well, and that's actually a really interesting question. I'd be curious if Porsche has any like OEM plus kind of parts. And I know that's typically more for their 911s and stuff.
But Macons for sure. There's access ports and definitely some off-the-shelf tunes.
Yeah.
So,
there's possibilities there, and actually you'd have a little bit of playroom. I don't think it would be something that I would track necessarily, but I do know at least one of my friends that has tracked one and was very impressed with. I mean, Porsche does not build a car that doesn't handle well.
Yeah.
I think you could do it if you wanted to, and like. At the price point, so it's like I'm not spending every penny that I have, at least not yet, because like the concern that I have with the Porsche is like, okay, something does happen.
Yeah.
How much is that going to
cost? Any mods? You keep that $5,000 on reserve.
That's right. Yeah.
Parts are available, but they're going to be just as expensive as importing them.
The extra budget is just prepaying for the repairs.
Yeah.
That's the concern. But they do have the reputation of late of being much more reliable. So maybe that wouldn't bite you.
It'd be a good option, regardless. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I was looking at that Audi A4 for $35, and that's one of those things where while it's working great, it's awesome, but with the maintenance bills, it's going to be into the 40s pretty quick if something happens.
Yeah. I mean, back to Subarus for a second. It's like if you look at the WRX, maybe. Like let's even leave the flex fuel off, but just the new WRX versus a used Macan turbo. Oof, like that's it's almost not hard. I mean, if you need the space, the Macan is better. If you're not scared about working on German cars, maybe that tips things to the Macan a little bit more. If you just want something that's brand spanking new, the WRX is a fun car to drive. It'll put a smile on your face. Maybe you lean in that direction. It's interesting to me, like the Ascent like flickered through my mind for a second. I was like, CVT.
Yeah.
But it's like if the Ascent didn't have a CVT, if there's a manual transmission option for the Ascent, that would be well, it wouldn't be exactly like a Macan comparison, but it would be way closer. Like the fact that that's only a CVT transmission. I think it's just much more of a utilitarian car, and would you drive a car with CVT?
And sure, you can upgrade to CVT. They sell performance ones. I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
But is that really something you want to do on a brand new car as well? Is that? Yeah. So well, that's the other piece.
Subaru says that they keep getting better. I hope that they do, but I know. Well, to my understanding, like there's not been huge leaps and bounds. I think the current Ascents are way better than the first generation, in the first couple of years. But it like for all the people at Subaru that are watching this, that reliance on the CVT only, it just kind of really does make looking at some of those Subarus. It's like you only can come at it with one mindset. Like the Ascent and like the Outback Turbo.
Even the Forester Sport.
Even the Forester, yeah.
I drive one myself, or I would love a new Forester. That'd be great. But the only one I could even really consider is a Wilderness, and that's still CVT. So
the thing I want to know is like now that there's the WRX GT, Subaru is like touting that this is their new performance CVT. But I feel like even as like parts guys who talk about Subarus all the time, we haven't really heard a lot of details about like what they did that's really improving it, or like what it's actually doing. I've just seen like rev match downshifting and stuff like that, and it's I guess kind of cool. It sounds like they're adding some features to these like transmissions to make them feel more sporty.
Yeah.
But I would love to know like what engineering they're doing to actually make them like hold more power or be more reliable, because I've known many people who've had everything from like NA Imprezas to CVT WRXs and have heard of many issues with warranties and, cars stalling randomly and having to get torque converters replaced, just all kinds of stuff, and it just blows me away.
I mean, there's not a whole lot to them to an extent. There's a lot of different CVT fluids. I think Subaru now has 4 different ones.
Wow.
And it depends on the car which fluid you're supposed to get. And I think the primary difference between these fluids is the coefficient of friction.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's more friction in the turbo cars, like, because they need it.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of it. And then there is a mechanism to adjust or maintain belt tension in the transmission. And so you can actually basically have the belt pulled or squeezed more onto the drums to get to work. I guess, I mean,
they're doing
really
something
that's kind of
all you can do.
As far as I know, like those are really your options. I guess my point there is that, I mean, if they had another option, if they would just look at something that wasn't only CVT, I think it would open the door on like these platforms like the Ascent, the Outback Turbo, Outback Wilderness, where it would be more appealing to more people if there was more drivetrain choices than just CVT, period, end of discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, and there are some advantages with CVT, especially like mileage. I mean, for a couple of years ago for Pikes Peak, we had an Outback, just a standard Outback with CVT. That was the runaround car, and I was stunned how fuel efficient that car was. It was not like a fun car, performance car, but like if you're commuting a lot, like especially with an all-wheel drive car, like that efficiency is kind of a next level thing. That's great.
They're also kind of surprising at like low speed. The CVTs are fairly torquey and take off quick
because they can have really short gear ratios.
Yeah, we had that Crosstrek in the shop, and I was blown away by like the first gear takeoff in that car. Feels pretty good. It's not terrible. Obviously, it's then just like a slush of like as you're shifting from there.
Right.
But the CVTs have some interesting potential. It seems like with the gear ratios, you can do a lot. It's just you got to really tune that, and I don't know how much.
I get why Subaru does it. I understand the advantage of it from an all-wheel drive platform from an efficiency standpoint, but there's like from an enthusiast standpoint, or for like anybody that wants to do a little bit more with the car, like having like an 8-speed automatic. If they had an 8-speed automatic, or something like that, that was just like a traditional automatic that was more robust, that like you can throw a little bit more at these turbocharged cars. We know what the potential is in the WRX. Well, the Ascent has basically the same engine, just like the Outback. But if you wanted to reflash the ECU and get this potential out of the new WRX, not a problem. You got a manual transmission, and I guess you could do it with the CVTs, but the CVTs are definitely more limiting. I would be hesitant on a bigger, heavier car like an Ascent to turn up the weight.
Outback Wildernesses.
Yeah.
I mean, there's multiple cars that have this same engine platform in them now.
Yeah. So you know that the power potential is there, but with the CVT drivetrain, and because they're bigger and heavier, like the WRX with the CVT, reflashing the ECU to make a bit more power, but it weighs 3,200 pounds. Well, that's way different than taking an Ascent, which weighs, I think they're like 4, maybe over 4.
Yeah,
slightly.
Sure.
I mean, the Ascent's a big car. It's a big car. It makes it much less tempting to play with those because the drivetrain is a little bit wonky. Mm-hmm. And do you really want to turn the wick up versus something like a Macan Turbo, where there's a lot of power to be had there also, but you've got the drivetrain that can handle it, very, very easily.
The transmission is probably pretty well overbuilt in the Macan versus
no doubt.
the Subaru CVT, which always seems to be stretched to the end of its life.
Right.
And another thing too is I believe it was the Crosstrek was offered in the 5-speed. Yeah. And I know that's right now a really coveted option for like the overlanding kind of group.
Yep.
Because, having that, flexibility when you are doing that is huge, and the Crosstrek as a platform is massive. So, seeing that in a wilderness edition, the Outback or any of them really, even an automatic would be really cool for something like that, because they are trying to do something a little bit unique with these.
Yeah, and they're surprisingly capable cars, especially the wilderness versions of the Subarus. They're surprisingly capable, and I know that it's not going to be everybody, but there's going to be some people that buy them because they are so capable. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But there's a little bit of weirdness in driving a CVT car. It's not as appealing.
Yeah, I know the old 4EATs and 5EATs had their own issues too. Like, I used to drive a 4EAT WRX, and I know your Forester is, so I would be interested to hear from someone more on, like, the engineering side from Subaru, like, oh, these are the statistics we got for, like, 4EAT and 5EAT failures and versus the CVTs over, a similar year span, like, how that compares. Because... everybody definitely talks down on the old automatics too. So, that's not to say that Subaru hasn't had other problems in the past. You can bulletproof like a 4EAT now a little better than the CVTs as far as we're aware.
Well, and the technology for automatic transmissions has really come a long way in like the last 5 to 7 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, Kia has dual clutch transmissions going into their Seltos now. Like the crossover SUVs with paddle shifted dual clutch is just kind of run of the mill. So it's a WRX automatic with that as an option just seems like a no-brainer.
I don't understand why it's like they jumped from the 5EAT automatic transmission kind of to the CVTs, and they've never looked back, and it's just been all in on CVT ever since. And again, I know that there's some efficiency from like fuel economy standpoints that I think is probably the main reason for it. But now that you have like these 8-speed automatic transmissions, they're picking up a lot of that efficiency, but it's a more durable design.
You have better performance and better efficiency.
Yeah.
So. And I know this is probably a older podcast at this point now, but I remember listening to one before I was here of, about the Pikes Peak car, the option of going from the 6-speed to the sequential. There's nothing in between.
Right.
You don't have a DCT that you can play with or even experiment with that could work.
Right.
So even having an automatic that, like Dylan was saying, we've kind of done some research, and there's ones with, some upgraded parts and stuff that seem to be pretty good that, you could probably, assuming, do something like that to a newer automatic too.
Yeah.
That even if it wasn't the strongest 8-speed, there may be applications for that on the track or something like that even.
Yeah. It's just, you could do it. It's just, if it's a daily driven car, especially playing around with the transmission to that extent.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, it's risky.
I mean, even converting an automatic car to a manual car. Like let's say...
Wanting to do mine.
We were talking about at some point where the only Forester turbos that were available were automatics. Well, what could you get one and then 6-speed swap it? And the answer is yes for some of them. For the newer cars, some of them get real complicated. Once you get into CAN bus, that gets tricky. We talked to Brian from iWire all about that a while back. But you could certainly do it. But if you did, and it was your daily driver, like would you have the functionality and the reliability? Would it be enough, or would it be something where like it would just be a little bit? It's not quite the same as if the car came with it.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of speak on that daily driving piece of it, like I said, I do have a bit of a commute, and this was before I was here, and I haven't had any recently, but the 4EAT issues, this is, I think, the 3rd transmission in my car.
Wow, yeah.
So, things happen.
Sure.
But, I don't know, again, like you were saying, compared to a CVT, like...
Is it actually that much of a difference?
That's fair. So...
In my research, I found all kinds of stuff. They have the clutch slipping issues, there's valve body issues with the 4EATs, and, there's valve body issues with the CVTs, too. So...
Yeah,
I would love to know from a really technical side, like what the statistics were that actually drove Subaru to just dive into the CVTs and say, you know what, we're going all in on these, and
it's fuel
efficiency,
economy.
and hopefully they're at least similar as far as failure rates, because
but the CVTs are way more efficient.
Yeah.
So that's why they went all in on that, because they're trying to get a 36 mpg fleet average, and with all-wheel drive there's a lot more drag, and so that was kind of what they looked at is really that was the only option, because like the 4ATs, the 5VATs, they were not getting anywhere near, they were not getting close to that efficiency. That's the big advantage that the CVT brings. So I bet you that what it is they figured, well, here's the failure rate. The failure rate's going to be in the ballpark of the same, but like you're getting an extra 5 to 7 mpgs on average with the CVT versus the 4AT. That's where they made the jump. But then they're trying to make it better. Like it is, anybody that's a Subaru person knows they've had some issues. So like once they made that jump, well, now you've kind of made your bed. You have to lie in it. You got to figure these things out, try and make it better. But I don't know. It's
we'll see.
Come on, Subaru.
Yeah.
8-speed automatic.
Or somehow release a CVT that's actually as good as an 8-speed dual clutch.
8-speed automatic. Just like, because I don't think that's physically possible. I think the physics are just not there with the CVT. I could be wrong, but I don't think.
I don't know enough about it either, but it blows my mind.
And then especially when you do have to compete with things, going back to that Turbo Macan.
Yeah.
Like, you have other platforms that, you could almost equal in power, and, you have the aftermarket support and everything for that, you could really make something like that, but Macan has a DCT that you can use too.
The Ascent is bigger than the Macan. If my choice was between a 6-speed manual Ascent, like an STI 6-speed manual Ascent, and the Macan with the DCT, I would probably go with the Ascent, because like I have a WRX wagon and it's okay for a lot of things, but there's some things where I have a 4Runner, an old 4Runner that's bigger, and I just like that because it can do more things. If the Ascent had a manual transmission or an 8-speed automatic or something like that, I think that would be a much closer conversation, much closer decision to make versus just but like right now, like, man, a Macan Turbo, it's honestly got my wheels turning a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm scared about the problems. Having a BMW for a few years now, and kind of getting a window into German electronics, German engineering, and like the weird shenanigans that you can get into, that gives me pause a little bit. But like, it's tempting.
Yeah.
I think the Ascent, you pose an interesting idea. Like, there is a lot of potential for them in that, like, if you had options for mods, a good transmission, like, using that as like an off-road, like, overlanding vehicle would be something that's way more on the table for people, kind of leaning into the whole outback wilderness mindset and all of that. So it'd be really crazy to see some people out, like, overlanding in a sense, just like people are taking like those older, like, Cayennes, VW Touaregs and stuff out.
Which is
that'd be really funny.
I've actually thought that would be an interesting discussion, especially with the new Crosstrek Wilderness coming out, and seeing how capable that car is. But it's still just a car that has capability, but it's not the same as like a truck.
There's reasons people get a 4Runner or whatever, a Tacoma, to go overlanding.
Yeah.
They want that extra
a
space.
Baja Wilderness? I'm in.
There's rumors that Subaru's doing that.
That'd be cool.
Fingers crossed.
The rumors. There's rumors about a new Baja. There's rumors about a Subaru truck. It's Subaru knows they're coming out with the Wilderness Edition, so they know that there are people that want to do off-road stuff with Subarus. There are people that have been doing this for years and years. They're just now producing a car that gets you like much closer to what the end result that you would want would be if that's what you're doing. Let us know in the comments if you think that this would be an interesting discussion. But I mean, to me, I don't know why Subaru hasn't really taken that next step and made like a truck chassis and then put an SUV on the truck chassis, like the next generation Ascent. They would have like
be cool.
a much more
Like a high-load transmission,
transmission
and locking dips or something.
Could you imagine
100%.
a Tacoma-style Subaru? That would be pretty cool. Because people
Which they
daily
could
those
absolutely do. And they have in other markets. Like in Australia, they have the high-load transmissions for a long time. They've done it. They have some experience with it. They could easily do it. And, man, it would be really interesting to see a real off-road capable Subaru. Like, the Wilderness Editions are a step in that direction, but, like, ultimately, like, I think the Wilderness Editions, that's either going to be the end of it or that's just the beginning.
It'd be really crazy to see if, like, the split from Toyota that's supposed to be coming actually brings them into this place where they, like, try to compete with a 4Runner or, like, a Tacoma market somehow.
Yeah.
That would be really crazy. Come out with
I
a
never
Baja.
even actually... I never
like
thought
a
of it until
Tacoma
right this minute.
competitor.
That would be cool.
I wonder if that's in part why they haven't gone down that road, because Toyota has got such a lock on, like, the 4Runner, the RAV4, the Tacoma, in these, like, entry-level but very off-road capable vehicles. Hey, Subaru, you don't do that. You can have the all-wheel drive.
Well, they have all the TRD stuff that, like you were saying, the Wilderness is kind of either the end or the very beginning for a lot of people, where the TRD is kind of that little bit more into the off-road even, where, you can buy more of a base model Tacoma and it's still really good off-road.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to have a TRD with a TRD skid plate and, all these things to be able to go off-road on these trails. That's something that is more towards that extreme. So seeing a Subaru that would be kind of a competitor for that, I think the Ascent would be a really good one even,
but like,
if you could do something like that.
Right now, my 20-year-old 4Runner I could leave an Ascent for dead off-road. And it's 100% stock.
Like, maybe not a Solterra. From what we saw.
True, that is true, and so maybe that's going to be where they go to the next thing. But like from a chassis strength standpoint, from just an overall wheel clearance and all, like they could absolutely go that next step. I don't know if they will.
But there's not a Subaru on the market other than maybe something like the Solterra that can really compete in that level.
In terms of clearance, my 20-year-old 4Runners is still going to
take the cake.
The irony is I don't know if it could pull it out of a ditch because of how much the Solterra weighs. But that's
true. Yeah.
That's a whole EV thing. That's all right. Well, as we're kind of winding down, any final thoughts for cars in this budget? I mean, it really seems like there are some new cars, even with this $35,000 budget, that are of interest, that are tempting. But it seems like used cars, like a used car that's not going to eat up the whole budget, where you've got budget left, so you can use it to kind of fix it up, personalize it, customize it. That seems like for pretty much all of us, that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I think my new car options, if I'm looking for all-wheel drive daily, probably a WRX, honestly, a 22 plus, it makes the most sense. Like under that budget, you have, like we said, the base model at around 32, and then you can add some wheels and tires from there.
Yeah.
If I'm thinking like for myself, for like the rear wheel drive platform I wanted looking forward new, I guess the Camaro was what I came to. It was the best price to horsepower to, it checked all the boxes that I wanted. And then, used, it seemed like there was just so many more options right now as far as piecing something together that you really, really want, that will check more boxes, right? Like, if you're looking for just a daily that has a warranty and is less thought, like, way easier to pick one of these options that we've laid out. Like, even the Mercedes or the Elantra N, like, these are great cars with warranties that are a little peppy, might not check all your boxes, but they'll get you there, and it's something nice to ride in. But then, used, like you said, I didn't even price this out because I have one, but like a GR STI hatchback comes well under that price point right now. You get a lot of money for mods if you're sticking to the $35,000 guns.
And I didn't consider it too in depth because just I know what I know. In that, like, I would have to know that the car was well cared for, well maintained. I'm not going to buy something that was like tracked within an inch of its life, had multiple engines put into it, and then now it's returned to stock-ish. And like how much trouble am I getting into?
Yeah.
I could work through that, but it's like if I'm buying something that's going to be a daily driver, like that could take a month or two. And like, I mean, yes, if you got the budget, you could do it, but like,
yeah,
a lot of times when you buy something,
are
you excited? I just want to get into it and drive it versus like have it sit in my garage for the next 3 to 6 months and then get to do it.
Yeah, and that's a real good point with the Camaro too. You could probably just go pick one of those up, or the Mercedes. You can go to a dealership and be like, I would like this, and you don't have to.
That one.
Yeah, and you don't have to spend that. Like I was even saying with the Mini Cooper, if there's other things that you would want to do, it's a lot of time and effort past that some of us want to do, some of us don't.
Yeah.
But then you also don't have the warranty either. Yeah. Where you buy a Hyundai, there you have a 100,000-mile warranty.
True.
If that's really important for your daily driver.
The other really interesting consideration here is like, I will speak personally. I've never spent close to this much money on a car to date in my life. It's really interesting how challenging it is to find a new car that is enticing in this price point.
Yeah.
Which is that too. Like, if I'm looking at new, like for me, like I need to be excited about the car. Like if I'm going to spend more money than I've ever spent before on a car, there's got to be some kind of enthusiasm there, some excitement about it. Otherwise, well, I'll get like this Macan Turbo. I'm super curious. I may have to go and drive one just to see what it's like, because man, if that's, I don't know, 30 grand, 25 grand, and it puts a smile on your face, and it's like, hey, for my commute, this is gonna be a game changer. That's kind of what I'm looking for, versus like something where like I don't want to spend that much money and feel like I'm making a compromise.
Right.
I feel like right now in the new market, that's all it is. Like if you really want something that has a warranty and it drives pretty well and checks most of your boxes, you're going to compromise, but you can find some options. Whereas right now in the used market, there are a ton of options. It's just you have to be willing to work for your goal and like take that time.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, like there's tons of stuff you can do in shop.
I think it's the used market, it seems to be softening a bit. There's rarer cars, cooler cars that are coming up at a more reasonable price point. Like I mean it's fun to like try and find that diamond in the rough.
Yeah. It's like took me I think 6 months to find my Forester.
Yeah.
Because it was one of the only XTs of that year that I wanted. And, so it's kind of that too.
If you're spending a good chunk of money, I mean, that enthusiasm, that excitement, I mean, that's like the hunt can be fun all on its own, and then you find the car that's in the right shape, it's the right color, and then you drive it home. Like there's definitely there's some excitement there.
And I would even say, and this is kind of down a whole nother rabbit hole, so don't have to, but it's like, when they were announcing the GR Corolla and that kind of thing. The MSRP is, under 40,000 or was very close to.
Like, it's 35.
So it's like, can you actually find something for MSRP like that Mercedes? You may actually be looking at 30, well more than that. You could be looking closer to 40 depending on a dealership or, something weird like that. So there's a lot of like, I think, brand new cars that could come in MSRP right at that 35 that would be pretty cool. But it's that, are you going to actually find one?
So the GR Corolla, I thought about that. The thing is that the one that's, let's call it 35 with a stretch, is the base one that doesn't have the diff package.
Yeah.
So it's got basically open diffs front and rear. And to me, it's like, it's the excitement. Okay, if I know that I'm buying this GR Corolla that doesn't have the diffs that I really know that I need and want, because I think that package starts at 40.
Yeah.
I'm not going to spend the 35 and then
and compromise.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that to me was too big of a compromise in that budget. And it largely is irrelevant because it doesn't matter, because the sticker is 35 and you're going to be charged like 45 or whatever.
Yeah.
Which is a bummer in and of itself. It's like, how many more of those cars could they have sold if they would have produced more so that there wasn't such a markup? But is that even what they wanted? I don't know.
It's like in that same boat as the TRD Camry. they produce quite a lot of those. They're around that 35. I think they're slightly more, which is kind of why I didn't bring it up initially. But, you know, they mass produce those. And it's a pretty cool, like, four-door sedan. So, but again...
We're getting marked up.
Yeah.
But there's the fact is...
badge, and so that costs money.
But at this price point, that there's just not a whole lot of options. And but there's, like... Hey, if we were going to spend $40,000, there'd be a handful more cars to talk about there. GR Corolla would potentially come in based on sticker, but like $40,000 now. I mean, now we're getting into like a real.
Yeah, you're getting close to a new 3 Series.
Yeah, that's a large sum of money, and I don't know. I mean, it's now way more than I've ever spent on a car. Like how much? Well, you just keep adding $5,000, and all of a sudden, I don't know, we're just buying $100,000 whatever. So, it's buying a car. It's definitely weird, which is why I thought this would be an interesting conversation. So, I think that is as good a place to end on as any. So, if you listen to this point, let us know what you think. What would you buy if you had $35,000 to buy a daily driver? What would you buy? Leave it in the comments. And let us know.
Curious.
Yeah, let us know what you think about
Chaser.
Hashtag Chaser. Yeah.
I'm in.
And let us know what you think about the Wilderness Edition stuff and Subaru's offering. Let us know if you think we should dig into that more, do a topic on that, something like that. So, well, thanks very much for watching. Thanks for your support as always. And until next time, stay tuned to Flatirons Tuning. Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatironstuning.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.